Light has an amazing effect on water where it actually changes the structure of the water, especially when it's next to a hydrophilic surface like a cell membrane. So this has huge implications for biology.
There's a lot of people out there, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, concussion therapy, TBI, where people are really struggling with energy in the brain. This is what excites me so much about this.
Yeah, and it's not just energy. We're actually seeing synaptogenesis, neurogenesis, as a direct result of photobiomodulation. So I really see that, we need to get the de novo studies so that we can get this approved by the FDA. I like to target the gut and the brain together because I want people to make that gut-brain connection. And there's a lot of benefit of healing leaky gut, reducing systemic inflammation. If you've got inflammation in your gut, you're going to have it in your brain.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about beyond just gut lining health and those junctions. Does red light have a measurable and significant impact on microbiome?
The microbiome is, again, another area of research that is just exploding right now. And so a group by Dr. Anne Lieber in Australia, they coined the term photobiomics for how light affects the microbiome. And there are a lot of rodent studies that show, yes, you can go from like a disease state microbiome profile to a more normalized microbiome profile just with light.
It would help you manage your nervous system to lower anxiety, which would lead to improved sleep, the third rock in the jar, which was also going to lead to improved mood regulation. I don't think this is a stretch at all. Do you?
I think that's exactly what's happening. And there's a guy in Harvard who's got a psychiatry department, Dr. Paolo Cassano, and he's doing exactly that. He's looking at mood disorders, he's looking at depression, he's looking at anxiety, he's looking at all of those things.
Welcome back to the 90% Healthy podcast. I'm your host, Claudia. I've got Dawn here with me as a co-host, and we have a fantastic guest today. We have Sarah Turner from Sarah Thrive. She is the founder and CEO, if I'm correct.
That's right.
And has a very impressive background going back into psychological sciences and nutritional medicine, clinical neuroscience, and she's bringing a lot of insights for us today because we're going to talk about brain health. We're going to talk about photobiomodulation. And for a long time, I think a lot of people who know about red light and infrared light and light therapy don't really know those two can go hand in hand. So I wanted to bring that to the forefront. And instead of going deep into your bio, Sarah, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about what brought you into this world. This is very niche, so I'm actually very curious.
Thank you. It's lovely to be on. Thanks for the lovely intro. Yes, so light and brain health, it is a relatively new field. So you're right to kind of question where that comes from. I actually started out my career in pharmaceutical sciences, looking at drug delivery devices. So I was initially looking at asthma delivery devices, and it was through that kind of education that I started to learn about the importance of the individual compared to, what we're trying to do. Because for a lot of things, like especially delivering fine particles to people like asthma, it really depends where the person's at. If somebody is grounded, if somebody has been outside and has actually discharged their charge into the ground, it has a totally different drug deposition in the lung, according to experiments that I did using, artificial lungs. So that to me was a wake-up call that really there is so much that we can do, even in orthodox medicine, by just making sure that the individual is kind of meeting their maximum potential from what they can do with their biology. And very simple things. I'm not talking about these, go off to some private island and do stem cells. I'm talking about things like, stand on the ground, go into your garden. And of course, light therapy comes into that because light therapy is one of the things which is really just mimicking being outside, particularly at sunrise and sunset, because that's when we see the wavelengths. But really, it's very, very simple technology that's mimicking a more natural environment. So I kind of progressed from pharmaceutical delivering drugs to now I've made a device that delivers light. So I kind of feel, I'm kind of in the same area, but I feel like what I'm doing now is so much more in line with, personal health and actually sustainable long-term health.
And that's exactly why we have you on. We love something that's sustainable and long-term. So good.
Sarah, the thing that got me fired up is you had a LinkedIn post, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, talking about red light therapy into the brain, improve cognitive performance. And we've just come off a couple podcasts. We did a podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib talking about vagal nerve stimulation, and we were looking at the role of vagal nerve stimulation and cognitive rehabilitation, perhaps after concussion. We've discussed the role of supplementing creatine for cognitive performance. We've discussed the role of ketone esters in cut. These are all elements of energy. And this is what's interesting. And so, in 2017, I had my first interaction with red light therapy and I was not thinking of this energy thing at the time. I understood cellular energy production at a biological level, but I had a wrestler who had torn an ACL in the summertime. He was trying out for the world team, tore his ACL in the world team finals. I get him back on campus, and at the time, we were working with the Air Force Research Lab at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they had brought over a red light table, $160,000 Nova Thor red light table. And I said, okay, I will throw the kitchen sink at you when I'm trying to get you back.
Mhm.
I'll do everything. So I take Nate over. I put him in this bed for 12 minutes. He walks in on crutches and walks out with him on his shoulders. And I was like, wait a minute, what is going on? Now, the challenge is not everybody can put $160,000. That table's the cost of most people's homes.
Yep.
And so you can't do that. But I started investigating, and anyone who's seen the podcast has seen the fact I have a red light table over my device over my shoulder. I'm fully vested in this science. So when you start to take a look at this, how do you go from pharmacological delivery to red light delivery? What was the bridge?
So initially, I went into nutritional medicine because at the time, photobiomodulation wasn't such a thing, and I wanted to do something to improve the health of the individual. So initially, I went into nutritional medicine. I opened a health food shop. I did kind of cooking, education days and things. But actually, nutritional medicine only gets you part of the way, because a lot of the times mindset and psychology and just what's going on relationship-wise, stress-wise, totally overtakes what you're trying to do with nutrition.
So true.
So I had a little think about it, and I did a master's in clinical neuroscience because I wanted to understand what is this thing going on with the brain. Because really, you can have somebody who's got the most terrible diet, but as long as they've got a really good mindset, positive community, all of those things they can overcome. And yet you can have somebody who's really, really fastidious about their diet, but if they're in a stressful situation, it doesn't work out. So I studied clinical neuroscience and then got myself over to California, where it was kind of the nascent biohacking scene. This is probably, 12 years ago, and it's just all starting up. And then I started to learn a bit more about light. I started to read about and follow Jack Kruse, and there were some other people at the time, Dr. Mei Wan Ho, I had the pleasure of meeting. So I started to look at how light is affecting water, which is a whole nother subject, because light has an amazing effect on water, where it actually changes the structure of the water, especially when it's next to a hydrophilic surface like a cell membrane. So this has huge implications for biology. And initially, that's the path I was going down. But of course, with a clinical neuroscience qualification, I started to think, why don't we just cut out the middleman and see if we can structure the water that's already in the brain, in the gut, wherever we're thinking about. So that was my kind of random walk into developing this tech, because I've come from a slightly different place where I didn't initially look at, when we're talking about energy, we're normally talking about mitochondria. And I didn't come in from that route. I was more interested in, okay, if we can structure the water in the body, how does the water act as a battery, an energy source? How might structured water also aid the function of proteins, or how blood can go through blood vessels? So that was my initial intro. And actually, I do think that is a lot of the effect of some of these red light therapies, especially at longer wavelength near infrared, which is why in my headband, you'll see I've got that long wavelength.
So you're making the argument here that water is storing energy. Is that
Yes.
what I just heard you say?
Yep.
And because I've always thought, as I've looked at this, I've always seen water as a transporter.
Hmm.
Listen, we have blood plasma, we have plenty of water. It transports a lot of things. And you mentioned the mitochondria. I think the data on this is pretty clear
Yep.
that with the appropriate application of red light therapy, near infrared, infrared light, there is an energizing effect at the mitochondrial level. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes, and that's the most documented mechanism, is that light will come in, you're right, it excites one of the enzymes on the respiratory chain, which is in the matrix of the mitochondrial membrane. So particularly cytochrome C oxidase, which is enzyme 4 in that respiratory chain. That then leads to additional production of ATP and all kinds of
Oh,
other
that's new to
things.
me.
Yeah. So
That's really okay. Sorry about this. So it's really interesting. So in the electron transport chain, there's typically 5 complexes. They argue back and forth whether there's 4 or 5 complexes. But that fourth complex is really important because if you don't have the necessary exercise output, if you're not burning off the energy that those mitochondria are creating, there will be a disconnect at that point, and there'll be the release of reactive oxygen species, which are leading to inflammation and so forth, and for our audience, let's back up just a second. We've talked about ketones before, and when you look at beta hydroxybutyrate, that's working at the Q complex, the second connection between the first and second complex. So it's really interesting that this is targeting both ends of that electron transport chain. For our audience, it's about increasing energy, but decreasing inflammation at the end of the day. Would you characterize it that way?
yes, I
Thank you
think Claude
for
was
yes.
going to say
I
something.
yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for because I was going to be like, okay, so now break this down to a level that somebody who's not a scientist will understand, like transport chain complexes, So our audience needs a little bit more.
Yes,
But I love that you. Yes, please.
I can say it. I mean, the mitochondria is just, I mean, I think people remember it from their
Yes.
schooling as the powerhouse
Yeah.
of the cell. It's where we
Hmm.
make energy, and the body utilizes chemical energy. So this thing that Don and I are talking about, ATP, this is just the chemical currency, energy currency that all the body needs. We use it for anything in the body where we need energy. We use this particular molecule. So what light is doing, it's stimulating the production of that. And when we're talking about this electron transport chain, it's just the way that the body kind of has this cascade effect where you're passing like charge from one of these little complexes to another. And in the end, you end up spinning this little motor. And actually, it's an amazing biological machine. When you look at this enzyme that
Incredible.
makes ATP, it is like a little motor spinning. The faster it spins, the more energy it produces. So what we're really doing is just spinning that little rotor a bit faster so we produce a lot more energy in the cell. The reason why water is so interesting in that particular context is if it is true that light also changes the structure of the water, makes it a little bit more viscous, then you're kind of like greasing that little motor too, because all around, that everything is made out of protein there. So basically, if the more you hydrate or the more you have water surrounding it, especially Jerry Pollock, who's one of the main researchers, calls it charge separated water because the water very next to the protein is negative and then the bulk water is positive. That's where potentially you get this battery effect on. But that also has implications because you get the stimulating light effect along with the change in the structure of the water. And that has the net effect of spinning this little rotor a lot more, so you get more of this energy molecule. So really, the main thing I think to take back from red light therapy is it is giving you energy. The mechanisms may be slightly different and there's lots of interesting mechanisms, but it is giving you more of that little molecule that you need to do any kind of work, including healing. Most
Yeah.
importantly, if your body wants to surmount a healing reaction of any kind, you need to have a surplus of energy. Otherwise, the body just maintains. The body wants to kind of maintain. You want to kind of survive. But then anything else that you need to do, exercise or heal, anything on sleep, Anything on top, you need to have additional energy. So that's why these things are so important, that you have enough of this energy molecule to do what you need to do in your body.
Yeah, I thank you for an explanation. I actually have never really heard photobiomodulation and light therapy explained in this context. So I am so thrilled that we're
Yeah.
bringing this to the forefront. I've
Absolutely.
seen this described in a way like cellular engine ignition, which is
Oh.
something similar to what you were exactly talking about. And that's very cool. Is there and Don, please correct me if I'm jumping far ahead, but I'm just curious, in this world of people wanting to do these external therapies, is there a Goldilocks zone? Is there a dose, a frequency that is obviously it's bio-individual, but let's say we're talking about cognitive health?
Yeah, there is what they call a biphasic dose response, in that, too little light probably doesn't do much. And if you do too much, what you do is you speed your mitochondria up to the point where they produce so much waste products. And if your body can't deal with those, you negate the effect. It's not really like you can really overdo it and damage yourself, but you can negate the effect by speeding things up so much. And if you haven't got those detox pathways open, you're possibly negating the effect. Also for brain, you want to be fairly low power, low dose, because the brain is super energy efficient. You really don't need to really kind of smash the brain with any kind of high energy anything, I don't think. So at the moment, there is no kind of actual prescription, but if you look at the literature, it's between like 1 and 50 joules per centimeter squared. And that's something that you just have to rely on the manufacturer to make sure they're reporting that. It's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult enough for the manufacturers to measure it. Actually, you need all this specialist kit, and, we're all kind of deciding exactly how you do the measurement. But most of the devices that are designed for brain, so there are quite a few companies now that have specific brain devices. They are meeting all of those requirements. You also don't want to get the brain too hot, so there are also requirements that all these brain companies are meeting. So, if you're taking just some other red light and kind of putting it on your head for a long time, that's something I wouldn't advise. You don't want to put too much heat energy into the brain. But yeah, it's something between, like 25 milliwatts per centimeter squared, something like that. But 10 minutes on these low dose
Yeah.
technologies is enough for most people. And actually, the more compromised you are, the less you need, because, you've got to then deal with the waste products. So it kind of is a
That's
little
a
bit...
great point. Yes, because sometimes people are like, oh, I'm hurting. The more, the better.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And Sarah, what I find interesting about your product, so you have a product that goes right on the forehead,
Yes.
and you're delivering light, which, tell me about the cranium. Tell me about the role of the cranium in this. But the other thing that we want to talk about is we all go to these biohacking shows, which are early adopter health and fitness. And frankly, I walk into some of those shows and I look at some of the booths and I think, okay, frankly, that's a crock of shit. That's what's going through my head. But then I run into a good scientist like you that really has a handle on this. And I'm like, okay, this is really changing. So looking at practical application, and again, I come from the world of athletics. We concuss people readily in that field, whether it's rugby or whether it's listen, football. I'll use the term football for, since you're in Britain. Listen, we're popping gourds right and left on this thing. And now I believe, if you're in a sport and you're worried about concussion or cognitive rehabilitation, and it doesn't even have to be full-on concussion. It can just be repeated head blows, things like this. This combination of, like I said, we can deal with it nutritionally with creatine and SPMs and ketone esters, but then we can come mechanically. We can improve the connection between the gut and the brain via the vagal nerve, using vagal nerve stimulation. But this is another tool that you have that I think is really interesting. Have you been able to get your product onto the head of athletes or people who are dealing with concussion? Have you been able to go down that pathway yet?
Looking at it, and I think one of the most interesting things, although it's very difficult sell, is prevention, because we do know now that you can precondition the brain. You know, that would be my favorite option. You know, if you've got someone who is playing these sports where you're going to butt heads, use the device before, you know, try to kind of preempt any injury. But that's a difficult one. Preventative medicine is very difficult. I am working with UFC in Vegas. They have a device there that they're testing.
Oh, good.
Interestingly enough, you know, I kind of did the whole pitch on concussive injury, but they want to know about performance, you know, so again, it's the sports area, it's interesting. But just from a TBI point of view, a lot of research that's been done or is being done is with the Veterans Association, because they have obviously a lot of people with all kinds of TBIs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And they actually have quite a lot of funding for the studies. So although my device isn't in that funding pool right now, there are devices that meet the same wavelength and power output as mine, so I can more or less prove equivalence to what they're doing there. And they get some great results. Dr. Margaret Naser is one of the lead researchers there. She's published quite extensively on TBI and concussive injury using red and near infrared, mainly near infrared, because near infrared is the one that goes, you know, you just mentioned cranium. You need this longer wave red light to actually get through the skull and actually even into the body. So, you know, if you see the red lights, they're more for a cosmetic effect because you can get the skin and the blood and the collagen and all of that, which is great. But to actually get into the head or into the body, you need near infrared. So a lot of these devices are using 850 nanometers, for example. That's a great one to get through the body.
Is that diode, is it particularly expensive for you to put that in instead of the red light, or is it just the fact that the market doesn't understand it yet?
I use 4 wavelengths because I want to get the skin, the blood. I want to get the 850 to get through the brain. And then I use 940 and 1070 because I'm targeting the water as well as the mitochondria. So I use 4 wavelengths of light. Some of the LEDs are harder to get hold of than others because it just depends what they've been used for historically. So the 1070 is an expensive LED, but I think it's
That's
worth
considered
it.
far infrared, right?
No, it's still near infrared.
It's still near?
Infrared. It's just, I know it's difficult to kind of explain the terminology. It's longer wave near infrared.
Okay.
Because near
Okay.
infrared goes up to about 1200 nanometers.
Okay.
When
Okay,
we're talking far infrared, once you start getting beyond that wavelength, then it starts to be experienced as heat.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's what you would get in a sauna, like 3000 nanometers. So that's your infrared sauna right there. It's a different effect. It's not a photonic effect, then it's more of a thermal effect. So near infrared still goes right up to 1200 nanometers. But the reason why people choose specific wavelengths is because they look at the absorption peaks of these enzymes that they're targeting. So cytochrome C oxidase, for example, the maximal absorption you will find, it has different peaks, and it has 850 is one of those peaks. 630 is one of those peaks. So that's why people choose those particular wavelengths. And then, like I say, the longer wavelengths are starting to get more research now. But water absorbs some of that energy. So a lot of people don't want it because they don't want the water to take the energy, whereas I do because I'm specifically targeting the water. But cytochrome C oxidase will still absorb quite strongly, even at those higher wavelengths.
Curious, one quick question. In terms of, since we're talking about water, a couple of episodes ago, we were talking about hydration. Does it matter how hydrated the individual? I mean, I know our body is about 70% water, but does it matter how well hydrated an individual is in terms of the efficacy of these wavelengths?
It does. Hydration matters. Also, skin tone matters. You know, how much pigment you have in your skin. You know, there are various things that are going to affect how your body interacts with the light. So, yes, I mean, from my point of view, hydration is always great because the more water that you have in your body and around your proteins, and the more you can structure that water, potentially the more efficacious this longer wave light therapy will be. But yes, you can kind of titrate up and down sometimes depending on age and skin tone and various other things. You know, and if you have someone who's, you know, like a therapist who knows about light therapy, they can do that for you. But a lot of times you can kind of have like a fairly standardized dose. Like for most people, 10 minutes of this is a good dose, kind of regardless of where you're at. And like I say, I think the one thing that I tend to ask people is, what is their general state of health? Because if you are sick or sedentary or really you haven't done much for a while, your mitochondria are going to be a bit slow. So when you speed them up, you need to give them a chance to kind of catch up with that. So you don't want to kind of really do too much at once. It's like exercise, I find
Yeah.
it's like a low level stress, like exercise. You wouldn't
Yeah.
send somebody off the gym to kind of be lifting weights for 8 hours and expect them to be all right. You kind of build
Yeah.
up. And it's the same with light therapy. It's a hormetic stress on the body. You want to apply a little bit of stress and back off, a little bit of stress and back off, and then the body will get the resilience and the robustness of doing that.
Sarah, can I build up to lifting 8 hours a day? Come on.
I don't know, Don. I thought you were there already, aren't you?
No, not even close. Okay.
I'm kind of doing something
No,
under the table with your legs.
I am very much a minimum. Okay, what does it take to hit it? I hit the minimum and move on.
That's it. You're out.
One of the things that concerns me is the level of charlatans in the industry, that they see this hot term, they go bolt together a couple, they have a China relationship, they create some kind of a device. One of the things that just cracks me up when I walk into these biohacking shows is I see these people laying down onto a chair, putting a blanket around them that's full of red lights, and they're fully clothed. And I'm like, you know what? You don't get tan when you wear clothes. This is something you got to be on the skin. You got to be naked. Or at least where you're applying the light needs to be exposed. So I see that, and they're making a sale based in the booth based on, oh, try this. How do you feel? And I'm like, wrong, disconnect. Misleading claims, talks about burning belly fat or eliminating wrinkles overnight. I'm sure there's an extension to improve mitochondrial performance and energy production and lower, that could be the belly fat argument. I think it's bullshit. What's real and what's fake?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because some of the terminology is complicated. We're talking about wavelengths and nanometers and power output and irradiance. I do understand for people it's very difficult to make decisions. So I think really you just have to go by the companies. Are they publishing? Can you see all their spec? A lot of times you can rip that up and put it in a chat robot and kind of get your own answer. Okay, is this an acceptable spec? What am I doing? It depends what your goals are. You have to be very specific about your goals. Like we said, if you're doing some kind of general wellness and you want a panel, it's going to be different for if you really want to target your gut and your brain, for example. And also you don't just want to buy a cheap light off Amazon because there are various grades of these light therapy devices. Some of the really bad ones can emit like heavy metals because of the way the lights go. So you just need to be sensible about it. I mean, but most of the companies that are kind of in the industry that are photobiomodulation companies, most of them are pretty accessible. It's a small industry. I know a lot of these guys, most of them you can kind of ring up the CEO and just directly ask them, or at least you can get hold of their customer support. So I would just recommend that people, first of all, know exactly what your goal is, because it does matter which of the devices you get depending on your goal. And then just do a little bit of research and talk to people and make sure that there are reviews and things on the websites. But having said that, it is a fairly safe, very safe technology. As long as you've bought it from a reputable place, you really are not going to do yourself much harm with red light therapy. It's safe for kids, it's safe for animals. Just do your research, buy one that you like and use it consistently. Because this is the other thing, buying them or putting them under the bed doesn't do the job. You have to buy it and do it consistently. And again, I equate that to something like weightlifting. You have to keep doing it every week or else you lose your gains. And it's the same with light therapy. You need to do it consistently. So whatever you choose, whichever device, buy it from a proper company where you validated it and then use it consistently. And then you kind of can get your own gauge of what it's doing and how it's doing it. And you're right, Don, you do have to have it on bare skin. And for my money, you want to have it flush on the skin too. Anything where you're standing slightly away and you're glowing red. On Instagram, there's loads of pictures of influencers. They're standing there and they're glowing red. That's the light coming off of you. That's the light that's not going in you. So if you're glowing bright red, just remember that light could be going in you if you had something pushed up against your body.
That's such a great point. I have a quick question in terms of the targeted versus panel. So, when you're using a targeted device, does it have a systemic impact or is it purely on that area that it is on?
It's red light therapy is very systemic in its effect because you're increasing general wellness. You know, you're, like I say, it's like doing a workout. You're kind of putting a low level of stress on your body where your body starts to bounce back. But
Hmm.
we've shown even things like wound studies, you know, there are lots of contralateral wound studies with animals where you can shine light on one side of the body and then you get a healing effect on the other side because you are activating the mitochondria, you're giving the body more energy, you're releasing cell signals to initiate healing mechanisms. So there's a systemic effect no matter where you do it.
Hmm.
Sometimes, for like if you had a knee injury, it makes sense to do it actually on your knee if
Yeah.
you can, because then you are getting the light right into that place. But if you've kind of bashed it up to the point where, you know, you can't bet, you know, you can put it just above, just below. You know, there are ways of doing things. I like to target the gut and the brain together because I want people to make that gut brain connection. And there's a lot of benefit of healing leaky gut,
Yes.
reducing systemic inflammation. If you've got inflammation in your gut, you're going to have it in your brain. So I kind of like the activating that systemic effect myself. I think it's great, especially with the brain. The skull is a little bit of a barrier. The light doesn't, you know, you're not getting as much light to the brain as you would another organ like the gut. So utilize that systemic effect, you know, reduce the inflammation in your body by putting it somewhere else, and then you're healing your brain at the same time.
We talked about it earlier in the podcast, that article that you posted on LinkedIn, the effect of low level light therapy on brain metabolite in patients with moderate therapeutic brain injury. Yeah, go Google that. We'll put a link in the notes, but
Yeah.
this is one of the things that's so exciting as someone who's, I have some friends that are suffering from traumatic brain injury. And, I was a wrestler. I have football players in my family. We have MMA very close to us. And frankly, I see some of these people and I feel like I can see right through them. They're breathing, moving, walking, but the brain is just not functioning at its highest. And I think this is where there's such an opportunity, and I have a good friend. We've been talking about the role of concussive therapy with auto accidents. That every time there's an auto accident, there's probably a concussion that happens. There's a lot of energy that's involved with that. And we just keep talking about energy, whether the energy is taking away from you, whether it's contributing to you. That's the process. The beauty of this, and the thing that I go back to, is that we have really good science. They've done this in a manner where they've used placebo controls. They've done a great job with the placebo controls, and we're seeing a benefit that comes from that. Do you expect to see more of this coming in the future? Where do you see the development in the future, Sarah, as we see the application of light therapy, and not just for healing injury, but for human optimization? And
Mm.
again, it's that mindset. I'll tell you, I was reading a book this weekend. It's called Ketones, the Fourth Fuel. Recommended if you love human. It's one of the great ones, and it's about ketone esters and how it works. And the researcher Richard Veach lost his CDC grant and was questioned about where he goes, but all of a sudden DARPA comes along, and DARPA is the defense group that's doing all the experimental research, and they give him a grant of 5x of what he was getting from NIH. Excuse me, I said CDC, of NIH, because and in ketones, in health and wellness, it's kind of passe. But in performance, when we look at the effect on our warriors and we look at the effect on things like that, it's incredibly beneficial. And I think this is where I see this technology coming from our very elite performers that are looking for just that slightest edge, but also from, there's a lot of people out there, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's,
Mm.
concussion therapy, TBI, where people are really struggling with energy in the brain. And this is what excites me so much about this.
Yeah, and it's not just energy. We're actually seeing synaptogenesis, neurogenesis,
Oh,
as a direct result of photobiomodulation. So I really see that, we need to get the de novo studies so that we can get this approved by the FDA. Because
do you
at the
think
moment,
it's an upregulation of BDNF?
it could be all kinds of things like that. I have seen a paper on that in a rodent model where they have looked at upregulations of all those growth factors, various growth factors are involved, because I think what happens is the mitochondria are like our sensors in the body. So once the mitochondria become happy and buzzing along, then they send a signal to the cellular DNA to switch on epigenetic switches to activate all of this healing and regeneration of the brain. Because all of a sudden there's enough energy in the brain to do it, and they're kind of switched on and they're like, okay, we've got enough energy, let's do this. So growth factors, reducing cytokines, all kinds of things are switched on in response to prolonged activation of the mitochondria due to light. And there are lots of other light receptors in the body that we're perhaps not even focused on. We're very focused on cytochrome C oxidase. I'm also looking at water, but basically anything in the body that has some kind of aromatic structure to it, which is a lot of the organic molecules in the body, will resonate to light to some degree. So I think there's a lot of legs to go with all of this research. And as soon as we start to really implement it into these training programs, like you say, and as soon as a doctor starts to take it on, perhaps it might not even be the FDA. Who knows what's going over there in the States? It seems things are getting shaken up a little bit. But as soon as it gets recognized, then I think it's going to take off, and it will be like the first line of defense for this neurodegeneration. And my goal is prevention of neurodegeneration. That's why I start with the gut, because if you can get to the gut when you've just got little gut issues, then, hopefully you don't get that neurodegeneration later on. So prevention of neurodegeneration, and like you say, can you then go from a baseline to optimal, or to optimized at least? And I think you can, because you just giving the body the signals and the energy it needs to do that.
Sarah, I have to tell you, I'm sitting here watching you, and you're so joyful. And I wonder, do you, as your role as a CEO, bringing a product to market versus being in a lab in front of your table in a lab, don't you feel more freedom as the CEO in the product development? Now, I know there's more risk and I know there's more challenges. Super nice to be sitting there with a big fat grant doing work and going to your lab every day versus, okay, what's my P&L say? But the joyfulness in your look is wonderful. It sounds like you're just having a ball.
Love it. And somebody asked me a similar question. And actually, a lot of the CEO stuff I do is a bit of a slog, to be honest, and it's been a bit of a steep learning curve for me. But what I am all about is getting the tech in the hands of the people that they need it, and getting it out there. And actually, this is the only way I can think of to do it, because, a lot of these events, you want to be either talking about research or you want to be commercial. And the research people don't want to talk commercial because they feel like it's a bit grubby. But without that commercial piece, you don't
Absolutely.
get it to people. So I like to be in both camps. I still love to do the research. And whenever I can, I'm back in a lab. I was in Berlin last week at Charité because they might do some research there, and I wanted to be there when they were doing that. But I understand the need for that transition to make it a product that people can actually use. Otherwise, what are we doing? What are we making these discoveries for if you don't put it in something that people can actually use in daily life? So I like that piece. Like I say, some of the CEO stuff done, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have signed up for it if I knew all that stuff in advance, but I do. I'm very happy to be getting the device out to people who need it. Yes.
Well, we're excited to have you in this CEO because I think you're really pushing and on the podcast, we refer to this as 0 to -10 versus 0 to 10. And that's an important line where the technologies or the therapies or the treatments will work on both sides of this. One is called a treatment, the other is called an enhancement therapy. And and it looks like you've got something that goes across the spectrum. Certainly at the top of the, we talk about 0 to -10. -10, you're dead. 0, there's no symptoms. Once you go to
You're
-1,
fine.
2, you're starting to develop symptoms of problems. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that this is a technology that someone can put into their life, again, particularly Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, TBI, any of, so let's go above 0. Let's
Hmm.
go to 1. Listen, we can go to 1 to 10, but something we hear people complain about a lot is brain fog. And when I think of brain fog, I think of inflammation. So what we're talking about is we're using light therapy to improve the mitochondrial performance, which is lowering the reactive oxygen species, which is lowering the inflammation, which is leading to clearer thinking. Is that the connection?
I think so. But you know what I find sometimes, Don? Sometimes people have gut symptoms that they kind of not, they had them so long they're not even thinking about it, right? And they'll come and say, oh, I've got whatever, any one of those brain conditions you mentioned. You just put light on the gut and you kind of heal those tight junctions in the gut. So you prevent leaky gut. So like all those metabolites from bacteria or little food particles and things aren't leaking out into the gut and causing that kind of systemic
Hmm.
inflammation. You stop that and then you kind of tone the vagus nerve. The brain fog symptoms can go anyway, because I think a lot of people are living with low level gut issues that they're not even realizing are causing these brain fog issue, because the
Have you
gut
looked
is,
at HRV response to light therapy?
yeah, it's one of the main markers that I use actually to assess. So I use the Heads Up platform. I'm sure you're familiar. Actually, I
Very,
think
very much.
you passed them on to me. So I use them because they have a great platform that allows you to bring in all your wearables. So what we do is if someone buys a device and they want to come on the research, we sign them up to Heads Up. And if they've got an Oura Ring or an Apple or whatever you're tracking HRV, we track HRV while someone's using the system. And what we've found is sometimes the HRV does take a bit of a dip, right? Because
Hmm.
the body's adjusting. And I found that myself, sometimes if I'm doing a new protocol or something, my HRV might tank a little bit. But what you're looking for is a gradual trend upwards, because I think what you're seeing with light therapy, with, the mitochondrial health, with the toning of the vagus nerve, with all these other things we spoke about, is that you're getting that resilience in the nervous system. And that does tend to show up in like a trend upwards in HRV, however you're measuring it. Unfortunately, everyone wears a different device, so you can't kind of get a measure between people,
Right.
but in your own data, you can see that upward tick.
Quick question. You've mentioned gut a few times here, and we know that you don't only have a brain targeted product, but also a gut targeted product. So I wanted to ask a little bit about beyond just gut lining health and those junctions. Does red light have a measurable and significant impact on microbiome and
Yes, so
diversity and
that
just the health?
the microbiome is again another area of research that is just exploding right now. And so a group by Dr. Anne Lieber in Australia, they coined the term photobiomics for how light affects the microbiome. And there are a lot of
Interesting.
rodent studies that show, yes, you can go from like a disease state microbiome profile to a more normalized microbiome profile just with light. So that is already proven in an animal model. They're now looking to do that in human clinical trials. So that particular group have already published on Parkinson's. There's a Parkinson's profile, if you like, where the species becomes depleted and you can kind of see that there's dysbiosis. They are looking to see whether or not with the light therapy you can go to a more normalized profile of the species of the bugs in your gut. And actually, they've done limited studies, but they are showing positive results so far. And I think it is a little bit different to an animal study because, there's different amounts of visceral fat on humans, whether
Yeah.
you directly impact the microbiome or whether you're just changing the integrity of the gut so that you make a nicer environment for the beneficial ones to thrive. I don't think we exactly know yet. I think for a very lean person, you're potentially getting right to the microbiome.
Mhm.
For somebody who's not so lean and who maybe has got some visceral fat there, potentially not, but you are still getting through to the gut and healing the gut and making a good environment for the bacteria.
You know, Sarah, as we talk about this, the body's very smart and it's
Yeah.
going to direct energy and healing to where you need it the most. And the fact that we're talking about light being carried in water, we essentially, whether it's crossing the dirt, it's crossing the skin, it's getting into our bloodstream, it's getting into our plasma, the body is going to harvest that where it needs it the most. Now, again, listen, we've talked about this before, Claudia, and the fact that, the brain and the gut are linked. The vagus nerve are one of our 12 cranial nerves, the only one that leaves the cranium goes straight to the gut. We have one that just go, and that connection is critical. And I think what's interesting about this is, again, it's the relationship of light to water to cell. And I think this is where the cool science is. And again, we've talked about the fact that, I can't just take a flashlight and put on my forehead. That's the wrong wavelength. And probably walking outside and sun tanning in the middle of the day, we're now into ultraviolet ranges and probably not the place that we want to be. So looking at quality of light, and we talk about this is part of the 4 rocks in the jar: movement, nutrient dense food, sleep, and light. And there's toxic light and there's nutritive light, and we're talking about the delivery of nutritive light as one of the key rocks in the jar. It makes sense that this would also lower anxiety. It would help you manage your nervous system to lower anxiety, which would lead to improved sleep, the third rock in the jar, which was also going to lead to improved mood regulation. I don't think this is a stretch at all. Do you?
I think that's exactly what's happening. I think, and there's a guy in Harvard who's got a psychiatry department, Dr. Paolo Casano, and he's doing exactly that. He's looking at mood disorders, he's looking at depression, he's looking at anxiety, he's looking at all of those things. Because you're right, that's exactly what's happening. You are changing the body's physiology in a way that allows you to get relief from those symptoms too.
I love that you mentioned it, because I was just going to ask about neurotransmitters, especially that we're talking, gut-brain connection and
Yeah, that's right.
so, and
Yeah,
all of these symptoms tend to come about because we live in a world where our neurotransmitters are out of whack,
yeah.
whether it's dopamine, whether it's women moving into menopause and just dealing with just dropping all of those, not only hormones, but neurotransmitters with it. So it's a very non-invasive way to re-regulate
Yeah.
and upregulate.
And like to your point about light, it really is because we are diurnal mammals that have evolved under the sun. Our bodies are totally in tune with that. We're meant to see the sunrise. We're meant to see the sunset. We're meant to get that exposure to switch on those different hormonal cascades. As soon as we get
Yeah.
out and we see the red sun coming up, our body starts to go through various processes. People say melatonin, it's the hormone of darkness. Actually, you start to make it in response to morning sunlight. You release it at night. So all of those hormones, cortisol, serotonin, whatever you like to mention, they're kind of timed, and we need to take care of our circadian biology. If we don't see red light in the morning, at night, it's even more important to supplement with red light therapy, because you want to make sure you're at least getting those long wave red at some point. I see it almost like, a vitamin deficiency. You need to replace it. The body needs it at some point.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And I still wonder, I know yours is right on the skin, but I see people having massive back and forth with eyes closed, glasses, eyes open with red light. What is your take? I know, I'm sure there's still research ongoing and there may not be a certain answer to this, but I've gotten so many questions. Do you keep your eyes closed? Like, what do you think? What would you recommend is?
Well, again, it depends what you're using, because any light that's extremely bright, you don't really want to have that full on in your eyes, because it's just going to tire your eyes. Most of these low power red light therapy devices, you can have eyes open. But I recommend, be on the safe. Why not err on the side of safety? You can have your eyes closed. I mean, if it's going to go through straight into your gut, it's going to go through your eyelids, So have your eyes closed, or if you're really sensitive to light, wear the glasses. When there are different mechanisms, the light sensors that are in your eyes are a different light sensor to what we're talking about with mitochondria. You have these very specific ganglia cells inside your eyes which are assessing circadian biology. So that's not what we're talking about with red light therapy. But It is, like I say, it is safe. You just want to be sensible. Don't look in any bright light. And especially not just before you go to bed too, because although it's
Yeah.
red and it's not going to mess too much, anything bright will. But there is a company that's just got a FDA approval for macular degeneration using near infrared. So
Oh,
it
What
is very good. I'm not saying people look at near infrared and do your own thing. I'm saying you need to use that
yeah.
specific, they've made a specific thing where they're monitoring it. But I'm just raising that point to let people know, it is very healing to the eyes done in
Mhm.
the right way.
what do you think about near infrared before bed? Turning the light off and just using the near infrared.
Yeah, I do it. I do it before bed. I do red and near infrared. I just don't look at the light so much. I mean, mine's not super bright anyway. I think it's fine. I mean, the body just doesn't want that kind of really harsh blue light, screens and things. So I tend to do my red light therapy just before I go to bed because I have it by my bedside and I know then it's my consistent routine. In the
Mhm.
day, I'm all over the place. In the evening, I'm, doing my thing, listening to my book, whatever I'm doing, that's when I do my red light. I think as long as you're not staring right in a bright light,
Yeah.
then it's fine. Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, as
Well,
we start to wrap things up,
yeah.
Mhm.
Sarah, what a thank you so much for blessing us on the 90% Healthy podcast. This has been wonderful. If someone wants to learn more about Sarah Thrive and your product, your website, is that where you'd recommend they go?
Yeah, so the website is Sarah Thrive and it's spelled CERA, like the brain. I know I'm Sarah, but it's CERA thrive.com. And then I've started to do webinars bi-weekly so that if people want to ask questions, they can just come and ask me questions.
Oh,
So I do it every other
That's so
Thursday. So
brilliant.
I do it every other Thursday. And sometimes my plan is just to bring on different experts so people can get case studies and things.
can I join your webinar? I'm so excited about that.
You can.
That's
You can.
brilliant.
You can even be a guest on. You can come on and teach people about
No,
HRV.
I'm going to be there just sucking up the information. That's so exciting.
And you have some, go for it. I saw on your website that you have some pretty cool consumer success stories with people with IBS and stuff like that. And it's very powerful to
Yeah,
see.
I have some great case studies. I'm not allowed to, kind of because it is still a wellness device. So I don't
Right.
talk
Yes,
too
of
much
course.
about any,
Yeah,
I'm not claiming to cure anything at all.
of
But
course.
there are people who've had their own experiences on there and they're kind of sharing that. And it is, it is amazing, just by putting back this deficiency, the body heals itself from all kinds of things. I really think that's what it's like. I kind of
Yeah.
equate it to, we used to send sailors off, doing their exploring and they'd all get scurvy and their teeth would fall out and we wouldn't know. And then all of a sudden it's vitamin C. Send them off with a barrel load of lemons and something and they're fine. We're doing the same by this indoor living. We don't even realize what we're doing. We're kind of on that same thing that everybody's making themselves sick and they don't realize it. But you can do very simple things just to replace that deficiency. And I think that's what those success stories are. It's people just replacing that deficiency and then, getting these great healing stories.
Do you know what sailors didn't need the limes?
No.
The ones that ate the rats, because rats
Oh,
make their
yeah.
own vitamin C.
No
So
way.
way. I mean,
You're
this is there. But what we have to learn is we've got to pay attention to. It might be rats, it might be limes, but you've got to get that
Yes.
particular substrate.
Yeah,
It
that's right.
might be getting out in the morning.
Yep.
Listen,
Get out in the morning. Yeah.
my dog is very effective at getting me out in the morning. And he's right now he's kind of pushing me to get out at night. So maybe he knows something I don't. I don't think he is because he's obsessed with just squirrels. But this is the challenge that we have is how can we get these routines into our life to overcome the effect of the engineered environments that we live in, temperature control. We're not outside. I'll tell we're right now Laura and I are up in northern Indiana and I am just loving sitting outside and working. It's I've spent the summer outside working
Right.
outside and oh my gosh, I feel so good when I'm doing it. Now, winter's coming, so it's going to change here a little bit, but I still want to do my best to keep my eyes in healthy light.
Yes, for sure. That's the way to do
And
it.
when you
still
can't,
small.
you make the investment, you put one of those in your house, or you go to sarahthrive.com and you get one of those devices. Again, I can't wait to play with one. This is so exciting. Sarah, thank you so much. What a wonderful. She's on LinkedIn, very
Yes,
communicative on LinkedIn.
I
Great
am.
follow on LinkedIn, by the way.
I can
I
follow you.
apologize. I've not followed your other socials. I'm kind of doing a social media fast right now
Yeah,
because just all the yucky stuff
yeah,
that's going on.
I know.
But there's great information out there, and we really appreciate you being here and being part of us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. And be sure, everybody else, to follow 90% Healthy Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Throw us a comment, give us your questions and whatever you want us to talk about. And also, like we covered it in this podcast too, it really just comes down to small, consistent things that you do for yourself that will make the biggest change. What we're talking about, 10 minutes. Seriously, you can read a book or scroll for 10 minutes, but you shouldn't, while you're at least helping your body upregulate and regulate. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Goodbye. Take
Thank you.
care.
See ya.
See you soon.